Hello everyone, and welcome back to our journey through some of the most fascinating and mysterious stories in modern history. Today, we are going to revisit a name that needs no introduction: Tupac Shakur. More than just a rapper, Tupac was a poet, an activist, and a cultural icon whose voice spoke to a generation. His music was raw, powerful, and deeply connected to the struggles, dreams, and realities of life in America during the 1990s. Born in 1971 in New York City, Tupac Amaru Shakur grew up surrounded by both hardship and creativity. His mother, Afeni Shakur, was a strong influence, instilling in him a sense of resilience and awareness of social issues. From an early age, Tupac showed extraordinary talent, not only in performing but also in writing. He began as a dancer and actor before transitioning fully into rap. And by the early 1990s, his career had taken off at lightning speed. Tupac was not just another artist on the charts, he was a voice for the voiceless. His songs spoke about poverty, injustice, and the struggles of communities often ignored by the mainstream. Tracks like Keep Ya Head Up and Changes highlighted his thoughtful side, while songs like California Love showcased his charisma and energy. This unique blend of social commentary and commercial appeal made him one of the most important figures in hip-hop history. By the mid-1990s, Tupac had become a superstar. He sold millions of records worldwide, starred in successful films, and built a reputation as one of the most charismatic performers of his generation. Yet what truly set him apart was the emotional honesty in his work. When you listened to Tupac, you felt as though he was speaking directly to you, sharing his life, his pain, and his hopes. But alongside his rise to fame, the world around him was becoming increasingly tense. The hip-hop industry of the time was not just about music, it was also about territory, labels, and rivalries. The East Coast-West Coast conflict became one of the most famous cultural clashes in music history, and unfortunately, Tupac found himself right at the center of it. While his artistry elevated him to greatness, the environment surrounding him grew more dangerous and complicated. Despite these tensions, Tupac never stopped working. In fact, his drive was almost unstoppable. He released multiple albums, filmed movies, and recorded countless tracks, some of which would not be released until years after his death. To many, it felt like he knew his time was limited, and he poured everything he had into his art. By 1996, Tupac Shakur had become more than an artist, he was a legend in the making. His voice carried beyond music, shaping culture, inspiring movements, and leaving a mark on millions of fans around the world. Yet, as we all know, his story took a tragic turn that September night in Las Vegas, cutting short a life that was burning brighter than ever. And so, today we revisit not just the man and his music, but the mystery and legacy of Tupac Shakur, an icon who left this world too soon, but whose influence continues to echo through time. September 7th, 1996, was supposed to be a night of celebration. Las Vegas was alive with energy, filled with flashing lights, busy casinos, and the excitement of a major boxing event. That evening, heavyweight champion Mike Tyson was fighting Bruce Seldon, and it had drawn celebrities, athletes, and entertainers from across the country. Among those in attendance was Tupac Shakur, then at the height of his fame, and Suge Knight, the head of Death Row Records. Tupac arrived in style, dressed sharply, full of energy, and in the company of friends and business associates. For many fans, seeing him at such a high-profile event was proof of his success and influence. Cameras flashed, fans cheered, and Tupac seemed to be enjoying the spotlight as always. At just 25 years old, he was not only one of the most famous rappers alive but also a cultural figure who embodied the voice of a generation. After the fight ended quickly, with Tyson claiming victory in the first round, the mood outside the arena was electric. Crowds spilled into the streets, and the city buzzed with celebration. Tupac and Suge Knight left the MGM Grand Hotel and Casino together, preparing to head toward a nightclub where they planned to continue the night. The two men climbed into a black BMW sedan, with Suge Knight at the wheel and Tupac in the passenger seat. They drove along the Las Vegas Strip, music blasting, energy high. Other cars in their entourage followed closely behind, forming a caravan. For Tupac, this was nothing unusual. He was used to being in the public eye, traveling in style, and moving with a group. As the convoy headed toward Flamingo Road, people on the sidewalks recognized Tupac. He was always approachable, often chatting with fans or nodding to those who shouted his name. That night was no different. He rolled down his window at times, soaking in the atmosphere of the city. To anyone watching, it looked like another glamorous evening in the life of a superstar. But in reality, the night would take a sudden and tragic turn. As their car came to a stop at a traffic light, the calm energy of celebration shifted into something far more ominous. Another vehicle pulled up alongside the BMW. And within moments, Tupac's life would change forever. That traffic light on the Las Vegas Strip would become one of the most infamous locations in music history. What happened there not only cut short the life of one of hip-hop's brightest stars but also created a mystery that has lasted for decades. As Tupac and Suge Knight sat at the intersection of Flamingo Road and Koval Lane, the atmosphere shifted in an instant. A white Cadillac pulled up beside their black BMW. Within moments, gunfire erupted, shattering what had been an evening of celebration. Tupac was struck by 4 bullets, 2 to the chest, 1 to the arm, and 1 to the thigh. The attack happened so quickly that witnesses later described it as a blur. Flashes of light, the sound of shots, and then chaos. Suge Knight, despite being hit by fragments, managed to stay in control of the vehicle. With adrenaline and shock driving him forward, he sped through the streets of Las Vegas, trying desperately to get Tupac to safety. Police soon caught up with the damaged car and escorted them to a nearby location where paramedics rushed in. Tupac, though gravely injured, was still conscious when he was pulled from the vehicle. Reports suggest that he was struggling, fighting, refusing to give in, even as his body was weakened by the damage. He was quickly rushed to the University Medical Center of Southern Nevada, where doctors worked tirelessly to save his life. For the next 6 days, Tupac's fate hung in the balance. Fans gathered outside the hospital, holding vigils and praying for his recovery. News outlets across the country covered updates by the hour, while those close to him kept hope alive that he might pull through. His mother, Afeni Shakur, stayed by his side, embodying strength and determination even in the face of the unthinkable. Doctors performed multiple surgeries, including the removal of one of his lungs, in an attempt to stabilize him. For brief moments, it seemed as though Tupac might survive. But his injuries were too severe, and on September 13, 1996, at the age of just 25, Tupac Shakur passed away. The world was stunned. In an instant, hip-hop had lost not only one of its greatest voices but also a cultural leader whose words and presence had transcended music. Fans mourned in the streets, radio stations played his songs non-stop, and tributes poured in from around the world. To many, it felt unreal. How could someone so alive, so full of energy and power, be gone so suddenly? His death marked a turning point in music history. It was not just the loss of a rapper. It was the silencing of a poet, an activist, and an icon whose career, though short, had already reshaped the landscape of American culture. And yet, as shocking as his passing was, the story of Tupac Shakur did not end there. If anything, it was just the beginning of a mystery that has lasted for decades because the question remained: who was responsible, and why? On September 13, 1996, the announcement of Tupac Shakur's death spread like wildfire. For his fans, it was almost impossible to believe. Only a week earlier, they had seen him laughing, smiling, and performing with the same energy that had made him a star. Now, at just 25 years old, his voice was silenced. The news hit not only the hip-hop community but the entire world of music and popular culture. Radio stations played his songs on repeat, from heartfelt tracks like Dear Mama to anthems like California Love. Vigils were held across the United States, with fans lighting candles, leaving flowers, and blasting his music in tribute. For many young people, Tupac was more than an entertainer. He was a voice of truth, a reflection of their struggles and dreams. The shock was magnified because Tupac had seemed unstoppable. In just a few short years, he had released multiple hit albums, starred in Hollywood films, and built a reputation as a once-in-a-generation talent. His charisma and presence made him larger than life. And his sudden death felt surreal, almost unreal. The loss also left behind painful questions. His mother, Afeni Shakur, became a central figure in carrying his legacy forward, managing his unreleased work and ensuring that his voice continued to be heard. To her, Tupac was not only a global icon but also her son, taken far too soon. For the hip-hop world, his death marked a turning point. The genre was already under the spotlight, with critics pointing to its raw lyrics and rivalries. Now, the violent circumstances of Tupac's passing pushed hip-hop into even greater public debate. Was this simply the result of an artist living in a dangerous world? Or was it the symptom of something larger, an industry and a culture caught in conflict? In the weeks that followed, tributes poured in from fellow artists. Some honored him with music, while others called for peace in a community that had become increasingly divided. Fans across the globe struggled to accept that someone who had seemed destined for greatness beyond music was gone forever. But Tupac's death did not bring closure. Instead, it sparked something far more enduring: mystery. Even as people mourned, questions about who was responsible and why began to dominate conversations. The shock of losing Tupac was matched only by the uncertainty surrounding the circumstances of his final night. And so, while September 13, 1996, marked the end of Tupac's life, it also marked the beginning of one of the most debated and unresolved cases in modern music history. To understand the weight of Tupac Shakur's death, we must place it within the atmosphere of the 1990s hip-hop world. At the time, the music industry was electrified by a rivalry between East Coast and West Coast rap. A feud that extended beyond lyrics and spilled into the streets. This conflict was not just about music, it was about identity, power, and cultural pride. And unfortunately, it often turned hostile. On the West Coast, Tupac was one of the most powerful voices, representing Death Row Records, a label based in Los Angeles that had become a giant in the industry. On the East Coast, Bad Boy Records, led by Sean Puff Daddy Combs and featuring stars like the Notorious B.I.G., stood as the counterpart. Both sides produced incredible music, but the competition between them escalated into open tension. This rivalry played out not only in songs but also in interviews, media headlines, and street-level conflicts. Tupac himself became a symbol of the West Coast, his name often mentioned whenever the feud was brought up. Meanwhile, the Notorious B.I.G., based in New York, became his counterpart in the eyes of the public. What had begun as professional competition was amplified by the press. turning it into a cultural war that divided fans and artists alike. The atmosphere was already volatile before Tupac's death. His shooting in Las Vegas seemed to confirm for many that the feud had crossed a dangerous line. Rumors spread quickly, with some pointing to retaliation, while others believed his death was tied to gang affiliations and personal disputes. The fact that Suge Knight, the head of Death Row Records, had been sitting beside Tupac only added fuel to the speculation. The idea that music and violence had become intertwined left many unsettled. Was Tupac's death the result of the East Coast-West Coast feud, or was it a separate act of gang-related violence that happened to strike one of the biggest stars in the world? The truth was and still is hard to determine. What is clear is that the rivalry contributed to an environment where threats felt real, and danger was never far away. The public fascination with the feud kept it in the headlines, and Tupac's death only intensified the spotlight. For fans, it was a sobering reminder that the music they loved was being shaped in an industry surrounded by real risks and real consequences. Even as people mourned, the larger conversation turned to the state of hip-hop itself. Could the culture survive such losses, or would it be consumed by the violence surrounding it? Tupac's passing was not just about one artist, it was about a moment in history when music, fame, and conflict collided in the most tragic way possible. In the aftermath of Tupac's death, investigators and the public immediately turned to the possibility of gang involvement. The 1990s hip-hop scene was deeply intertwined with street culture, and many artists including Tupac were connected, directly or indirectly, to groups that operated beyond the music industry. For some, his shooting seemed less like a random act of violence and more like the result of an escalating conflict. One reason suspicion fell in this direction was that the attack appeared targeted and deliberate. The Cadillac that pulled up beside Tupac's car did not spray bullets randomly into the night. It seemed to know exactly where he was sitting, and the attack lasted only a few seconds before the vehicle sped away into the darkness. To many observers, this had the signature of a planned strike, not a chaotic outburst. The presence of Suge Knight, the head of Death Row Records, only deepened the mystery. He was driving the car that night and sat just inches away from Tupac when the shooting happened. Despite being grazed by fragments, Suge walked away with relatively minor injuries. Some found this curious. How could the passenger take the full force of the attack while the driver, sitting closer to the source of the gunfire, survive? Theories grew rapidly, with some pointing to enemies of Suge Knight, while others speculated that he might have been a target himself. The world of gangs in Los Angeles and beyond also played into these suspicions. Rival groups often operated in connection with record labels, concerts, and artists, blurring the lines between the entertainment industry and the streets. Tupac's fame had not shielded him from this environment. In fact, it may have made him even more vulnerable. As rumors spread, people began linking his death to previous altercations and unsettled disputes, suggesting that what happened in Las Vegas was part of a larger cycle of retribution. Yet, despite these suspicions, nothing was proven. Witnesses were reluctant to speak, evidence was limited, and the Las Vegas police struggled to build a case strong enough to point directly at any gang or individual. The idea of gang involvement made sense to many, but it remained a theory, one possibility among several. What was undeniable, however, was the impact. Tupac's death became not only a tragedy for music but also a symbol of how deeply violence had become entangled with hip-hop culture in the 1990s. Fans were left asking, was this the price of fame in an industry caught between art and the streets? In the chaotic hours and days following the shooting, one figure stood at the center of both speculation and scrutiny: Suge Knight, the powerful head of Death Row Records. as the driver of the BMW on the night of September 7, 1996, he had been right beside Tupac when the attack occurred. While fragments grazed his head, he escaped with relatively minor injuries compared to Tupac's devastating wounds. For some, this survival raised uncomfortable questions. Was Suge Knight the intended target, and Tupac had been struck by chance, or had the gunman aimed directly at Tupac while sparing the driver? These questions fueled rumors, theories, and suspicions that would follow the case for years. The Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department opened an official investigation almost immediately. Detectives interviewed witnesses, analyzed the crime scene, and tried to track down the white Cadillac that had disappeared into the night. Yet the inquiry soon hit roadblocks. Few people were willing to cooperate, and those who might have had information often remained silent, either out of fear or distrust of law enforcement. Suge Knight himself gave statements, but his version of events did little to clarify the bigger picture. He insisted that the attack was a sudden ambush, with no warning and no clear motive. To his supporters, this reinforced the idea that both he and Tupac had been victims of a larger feud. To critics, however, it left room for suspicion, as Suge was known for his connections to both the music industry and the street world. The police also faced challenges in terms of evidence. In an era before modern surveillance and digital tracking, following leads was far more difficult. There were no clear video recordings of the shooting, and forensic evidence was limited. What investigators had instead were fragments of testimony, scattered rumors, and the heavy weight of public pressure. Despite months of work, the Las Vegas investigation failed to deliver results. No one was formally charged, and the case eventually went cold. For Tupac's fans, the lack of justice added insult to tragedy. For the hip-hop community, it confirmed fears that the industry was caught in a cycle of violence with no accountability. Suge Knight's role in the story remained a source of endless debate. Was he simply another victim, caught in the crossfire of forces beyond his control, or was there something deeper, hidden in the world of power, money, and rivalries that surrounded Death Row Records? Without conclusive evidence, the truth remained elusive, leaving more questions than answers. The failure of the official investigation opened the door to countless theories about gangs, industry rivalries, and even conspiracies that reached far beyond the streets of Las Vegas. And it ensured that the story of Tupac's death would remain unsolved, adding to the legend of an artist whose life was already larger than life itself. When the Las Vegas investigation stalled and no one was ever charged, the vacuum of truth gave birth to something else, a storm of conspiracy theories. Fans, journalists, and even fellow artists began asking questions that the authorities could not answer. If the police could not identify the shooter, then who was truly responsible for Tupac's death? One of the most common theories centered on gang retaliation. Just hours before the shooting, Tupac had been involved in a physical altercation at the MGM Grand Casino with a known gang member. To many observers, this confrontation provided a possible motive, retaliation carried out later that night. While this theory had credibility, it was never confirmed, and no direct link between the casino fight and the attack on Tupac's car was ever proven. Another theory looked inward, pointing at the music industry itself. Some suspected that rivalries between record labels, particularly the infamous East Coast-West Coast feud, might have escalated into deadly action. The tension between Death Row Records and Bad Boy Records was no secret, and fans wondered whether Tupac's death was connected to these business and cultural rivalries. Yet once again, no concrete evidence tied any industry figure directly to the crime. Beyond these possibilities, even more sensational ideas began to circulate. Some whispered about hidden plots involving powerful figures. suggesting that Tupac's growing influence as both an artist and a cultural activist may have threatened larger interests. Others believe that internal conflicts within Death Row Records itself could have played a role. These theories reflected the deep mistrust people felt toward both the industry and the justice system, but none could be substantiated. Then there were the most dramatic claims, that Tupac's death had been staged. Supporters of this theory pointed to his reputation as a visionary artist who often spoke about life, death, and destiny. They claimed he had orchestrated his own disappearance to escape the chaos of fame and violence. Over the years, alleged sightings of Tupac in Cuba, Africa, or other distant places fueled the myth that he might still be alive. Though almost certainly fictional, these stories show how strongly people wanted to believe that Tupac had found a way to survive. What all these theories have in common is that they emerged because of the lack of closure. With no arrests, no trial, and no official answers, the public filled the silence with speculation. Tupac's story became not only a tragedy but also a puzzle that millions of people around the world wanted to solve. Yet, despite decades of investigation and endless theories, the truth behind the Las Vegas shooting has never been confirmed. This enduring mystery transformed Tupac from a rap superstar into something even larger. A cultural legend whose life and death continue to inspire debate, fascination, and myth. As the years passed and no definitive answers were found, a different type of story began to take shape, one that blurred the line between grief and hope. Many fans simply could not accept that Tupac Shakur, a man so full of life and energy, could be gone at just 25. This disbelief gave rise to one of the most persistent cultural myths of modern times: the theory that Tupac never truly died. Almost immediately after his passing, supposed sightings of Tupac began to circulate. Some claimed to have seen him in Cuba, others in Africa, living quietly away from the chaos of fame. Grainy photos, blurry videos, and urban legends were shared widely, with each new piece of evidence fueling the idea that Tupac had staged his own disappearance. Part of the reason this theory resonated was Tupac's own artistry. In his music and interviews, he often spoke about death, destiny, and the idea of living forever through art. Songs like Hail Mary and his frequent references to fate made some fans wonder if he had left clues behind, predicting or even orchestrating his own exit. His posthumous album releases only strengthened this belief. When new songs kept coming out years after 1996, some saw it not as the result of unreleased recordings but as proof that Tupac was still alive and working in secret. There was also the concept of Machiavelli, a stage name Tupac adopted shortly before his death. Inspired by the Italian philosopher Machiavelli, who wrote about faking one's death to gain advantage over enemies, the alias seemed to fit perfectly into the myth. To believers, it was not just a name but a hint, a coded message that Tupac had left the stage intentionally, waiting for the right moment to return. Of course, most of these claims were built on speculation, coincidences, or pure imagination. There has never been credible evidence to support the idea that Tupac survived that night in Las Vegas. But in a way, the truth did not matter. The myth itself became a powerful part of his legacy. For fans struggling with loss, believing that Tupac was still alive offered comfort. For others, the theory kept him larger than life, transforming him from a man into an almost mythical figure. What this shows is how deeply Tupac connected with people. His impact was so profound that many refused to let go of him, even decades after his passing. The idea that he might still be out there, somewhere, continues to spark conversations and documentaries to this day. Whether alive in reality or only through myth, Tupac remains present in culture. His words, His music, and even the theories about his survival ensure that his story never truly ended in 1996. While the theories about Tupac's survival kept conversations alive, the undeniable reality was that his passing on September 13, 1996 shook the world to its core. Fans across the globe mourned the loss of a voice that had spoken directly to their struggles, dreams, and fears. News outlets covered his story endlessly, while radio stations filled the airwaves with his music, turning every song into both a tribute and a reminder of what had been lost. For the hip-hop community, Tupac's death was more than just a personal tragedy, it was a cultural earthquake. In an industry already wrestling with rivalry, identity, and violence, the loss of one of its brightest stars forced everyone to reflect on the costs of fame, power, and conflict. To many, it felt as though a rising movement had been silenced just as it was reaching its height. And yet, paradoxically, Tupac's death only strengthened his influence. In life, he had been a superstar. In death, he became a legend. His albums sold in even greater numbers. His lyrics were studied more closely, and his image became iconic. Murals, magazine covers, and documentaries celebrated him not just as a rapper, but as a cultural prophet whose words carried timeless weight. Songs like Changes, Keep Ya Head Up, and Dear Mama resonated even more deeply after his passing. Listeners heard them not just as tracks, but as lasting messages, a testament to the fact that Tupac's art transcended entertainment. He had always aimed to inspire and provoke thought. And in death, his mission seemed amplified. The tragedy of losing him at just 25 also fed into his mythos. Like other artists who died young, Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, Kurt Cobain, Tupac entered the ranks of those whose unfinished lives left behind a haunting what if. What more could he have created? What causes could he have championed? What kind of leader might he have become beyond music? These unanswered questions only made his legacy grow stronger. Beyond the music world, Tupac became a symbol of resistance and authenticity. His openness about hardship, injustice, and survival resonated with people across backgrounds. He was more than a performer. He was a storyteller of real life. Someone who turned his personal experiences into universal messages. So while his death shocked the world, it also ensured that Tupac would never fade. Instead of being remembered as just another star, he became immortalized as a cultural icon, someone whose influence reached beyond hip-hop into politics, art, and social consciousness. Even today, decades later, Tupac remains a touchstone for discussions about race, justice, fame, and truth. His words continue to inspire new generations, proving that while his life ended too soon, his voice never truly went silent. As the years passed, one fact became painfully clear: the case of Tupac Shakur's death remained unsolved. Despite multiple investigations, countless theories, and endless speculation, no one was officially charged. The white Cadillac disappeared into the night, and with it, the truth about who was responsible. For fans and loved ones, this lack of closure was devastating. But the mystery also contributed to Tupac's growing legend. His story was no longer just about music, it became a narrative of questions without answers. A case that symbolized both the dangers of the world he lived in and the unresolved struggles of an entire era. His murder joined the ranks of other infamous unsolved cases, not only in hip-hop but in the history of American popular culture. Yet even without justice in the courts, Tupac achieved something extraordinary. His influence only grew stronger. Posthumous albums continued to be released, featuring material he had recorded before his passing. These records topped the charts, proving that his voice was still in demand. Documentaries, books, and films explored his life, keeping his story alive for each new generation. Beyond music, Tupac became a symbol of resilience, truth, and artistic power. He was celebrated not just as a rapper, but as a poet who gave voice to communities often overlooked. His lyrics about injustice, inequality, and survival still resonate today, reminding listeners that his message was timeless. Murals of Tupac appeared in cities across the world, from Los Angeles to Johannesburg. Young artists cited him as their inspiration, carrying forward his vision of using music as a tool for storytelling and change. Universities even began studying his work, recognizing it as literature and cultural history, not just entertainment. The unsolved nature of his case also left room for debate, ensuring that Tupac never truly left the public conversation. Discussions about his death often returned to larger questions. The influence of gangs in the music industry, the pressures of fame, and the responsibility of a culture that sometimes blurred the line between art and reality. Even decades later, Tupac's presence feels immediate. His songs are still played, his interviews still quoted, and his image still sparks recognition. In a sense, the fact that his case remains unsolved adds to his immortality. Without closure, his story remains open-ended, making him both a tragedy and a legend. In the end, Tupac's enduring cultural impact proves that while his life was cut short, his voice continues to live. He was not only a product of his time, he became a figure who transcended it, ensuring that his name and message will echo for generations to come. The story of Tupac Shakur is one of brilliance, tragedy, and mystery. In just 25 years of life, he transformed himself from a young poet with a troubled upbringing into a global icon, leaving behind music, films, and words that still resonate decades later. His artistry was powerful because it was honest. Tupac poured his heart into his work, exposing pain, hope, love, and anger with a rawness that made millions feel understood. And yet, the circumstances of his death continue to cast a long shadow. The unanswered questions, the unsolved investigation, and the countless theories ensure that his name will forever be linked not only to greatness but also to mystery. Who fired the shots that night in Las Vegas? Was it an act of gang retaliation, a feud within the industry, or something larger and more hidden? With no clear answers, Tupac's story remains suspended between fact and speculation. But perhaps that is also why his legend endures. Tupac's life was about more than music. It was about truth-telling, about shining light on struggles that others ignored. In death, he became a symbol of unfinished business, both in the sense of justice never delivered and in the sense of the potential he never had the chance to fully realize. This duality, artistic triumph and unsolved tragedy, is what keeps his story alive. His influence is undeniable. Tupac's music continues to inspire new generations of artists around the world. His words are quoted in classrooms, community rallies, and political speeches. His face appears on murals and tributes, not just as an entertainer, but as a voice of resilience and resistance. Even those born years after his passing know his name, proving that his legacy is timeless. Tupac Shakur may be gone, but he has never truly left. His spirit lives in the beats of hip-hop, in the poetry of his lyrics, and in the conversations that still surround him. He remains a reminder of both the power of art and the fragility of life. As we look back on his story, we see not only what was lost but also what endures, a voice that refuses to be silenced, a mystery that refuses to be solved, and a legacy that continues to grow. Tupac once said, "I am not saying I am going to change the world, but I guarantee that I will spark the brain that will change the world." In many ways, he was right. And so, as we close this chapter, we remember Tupac not only as a fallen star but as an eternal influence, an artist, a thinker, and a legend whose story will never fade. As we bring today's journey to an end, one thing becomes clear: Tupac Shakur's story is more than a tragedy, it is a legacy. His music, his words, and his presence continue to inspire people all over the world. Though the mystery of his final night in Las Vegas remains unsolved, his voice has never truly gone silent. What happened to Tupac is a question that may never be fully answered, but perhaps that is why his name lives on stronger than ever. His art, his passion, and his fearless honesty turned him into more than just a rapper. He became a cultural icon whose influence stretches far beyond music. Thank you for joining me in exploring this chapter of history. If you enjoyed today's story, do not forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Do you believe we will ever know the full truth behind Tupac's death, or will it forever remain one of music's greatest mysteries? Until next time, stay curious, stay inspired, and I will see you in the next story.